What's up guys, Coach Vic here. Are you struggling to lose weight? Are you having issues finding the motivation that you need to get into a regular training regime? Well, let me tell you guys, the problem may be one that you're not even aware that you have. And not only that, but the solution might be something that's far easier than you would ever expect it to be, guys. I want to talk to you about dopamine and whether or not you might be one of those individuals that suffers from a dopamine deficiency. So when we talk about dopamine, there are a few things that we want to keep in mind. First of all, what is dopamine? The primary functions of dopamine, it's been called the motivation molecule, for instance. Self-explanatory. It plays a large role in our ability to stay motivated to complete tasks, to get up and go, so on and so forth. So obviously, that has a lot to do with our energy levels. Not only that, it has a lot to do with our mental focus and our ability to maintain focus on a task at hand or at a task coming up in the near future. Additionally, it's also responsible for managing our pleasure reward system. So that feeling of, if I do this, I get the kickback that I'm looking for. If I accomplish this, then I will feel good. And lastly, one of the other major influences that dopamine has on us is our impulse control. So your ability to say no to that extra piece of cake or not to get up out of bed at 3 in the morning to go downstairs and have that extra bowl of cereal. Dopamine has a huge impact on your ability to control and to manage those cravings and those urges. Also, when we're talking about dopamine and a deficiency more specifically, there are some things that I really want to highlight to you guys. And believe it or not, this is going to apply to more of you than you probably even realize. Most of us have some form of deficiency, some amount of deficiency. It just depends on so many other factors as to whether or not we actually notice it or how it impacts us on a daily basis. So some of the things that you may feel if you are deficient in dopamine are as follows. You might have a lower energy level. So getting up and going to the gym, you just might be tired after that long day at work. You might not want to get up and do it. You might not want to put just that little bit of extra effort in because you just don't have the energy. Or maybe it's because your dopamine levels are just a little bit lower than you actually need them to be to find that extra bit of motivation. Fatigue, mental and physical, guys. The two go hand in hand. So if you're physically fatigued, it's going to be a lot harder to muster up the mental energy, and vice versa. If you have that mental fatigue after a long day at the office or in class or dealing with the kids, you might also still struggle to find that physical and mental motivation to get up and think about putting the energy forth into a workout or a walk or something that's going to benefit you. Sleep issues, guys, that's a huge one. For those of us who are slightly or extremely deficient when it comes to dopamine, your sleep patterns might be negatively affected. And we all know that sleep is one of the most important components of overall health and wellness, whether we're talking about recovery, whether we're talking about mood, whether we're talking about appetite control. So many things are influenced by proper or improper sleeping schedules and sleeping patterns. So that is a huge one, guys. Depression. So when we're talking about psychological conditions, emotional disorders, so on and so forth. A huge thing that a lot of people are becoming more and more comfortable with bringing to the forefront is conversations about depression, guys. Depression is something that plagues so many people at varying amounts for varying reasons, but it is a huge issue. It's almost an epidemic, if you will, that just until recently was often sort of swept under the rug, guys. So being deficient in dopamine can actually cause you to become a little bit more depressed. And then if you have other factors that can contribute to that depression, it's easy for that to spiral out of control, guys, making it very hard to think about implementing positive things into your life. There are a number of reasons that you could be experiencing a deficiency in something like dopamine, and they vary from individual to individual, and it might be one, it might be a combination of a number of them, but I just want to talk to you guys real quick about some of the most common issues that people experience and the most common causes that lead to something like this, okay? So this is huge, especially in our country. Poor diet or poor nutrition, guys, and that is sad because that's something that we have the ability to control more so than almost anything else. What we put in our bodies on a daily basis, we have all the ability in the world to control that and to manage that. Sometimes the issue is just not knowing what the right things are. Sometimes the issue is just not caring enough to make the right decisions. So whatever the case may be, that is second to none, guys. That is the biggest one. Obesity, guys, obviously can be linked pretty strongly to poor diet and poor nutrition. But if you're overweight, your body, your brain, everything operates differently than a truly healthy mind and body, guys. So obesity, aside from the fact that it can have a negative impact on your dopamine levels, can cause a cascade and a domino effect of other negative health consequences, guys. So obesity, poor nutrition and diet, very closely linked, but nonetheless a huge one on its own. Things like nicotine, drugs, alcohol, those give us that temporary increase in dopamine. It's not improving our ability to naturally produce dopamine or to balance that on our own. It's giving us this crutch that gives us that sensation that we're looking for temporarily. And then when the stimulus is removed, we're back to where we were beforehand. And then the cycle can continue. That addictive behavior can grow stronger and stronger, and you can become more and more reliant on those things. Okay, so guys, just like nicotine, drugs, and alcohol, caffeine is a drug as well that acts as a drug. Also creates this temporary high, this temporary increase in our dopamine levels that as we process that caffeine and as those caffeine levels drop in our system, then so do those dopamine levels and they start to return to normal as well, guys. All right, guys, so we've talked about what a dopamine deficiency is. We've talked about the importance of dopamine. We've talked about what some of the major causes for a deficiency are. Now what I want to share with you guys is some healthy ways, some all natural ways that you can implement on a daily basis to improve those dopamine levels, guys, and hopefully also improve any of the negatives that you may be experiencing in relation to the deficiency that you might have, okay? So these are gonna seem like common sense. Some of them may not, but I just wanna reiterate the importance of these things because not just for dopamine purposes or dopamine level purposes, but just for overall health and wellness, these are things that we need to be considering anyhow, because they are just good for everything, okay? So obviously food selection, guys. Like I mentioned when we were talking about poor nutrition and poor dieting and how that can negatively impact you mentally and physically, choosing to put the right things in your body can make all the difference, okay? So in reference to dopamine specifically, a high protein diet is generally gonna be beneficial. Now, you don't have to go overboard, but the importance of protein is as follows. There is an amino acid called tyrosine, and tyrosine is one of the essential building blocks for dopamine. It's like trying to build a brick house without any bricks. If you don't have tyrosine and you don't have enough of it in your system, there's no way that your body's gonna be able to create enough dopamine without having to revert to some of those unwanted behaviors, those other crutches that we talked about, okay? So think about increasing your protein intake a little bit. Some foods, just a couple, there are plenty more to add to this list, but just a couple of foods, health conscious foods that you can implement into your daily diet that will help you to build those levels of tyrosine in your system. Almonds, avocados, seeds, specifically sesame seeds, for instance. Turmeric, that's a seasoning for those of you who might not know that. Bananas, these are all very easy to implement and also come with a number of other health benefits as well, okay? Guys, being active is one of the most important things you can do for not just your physical health, but your mental health. Exercising on a regular basis boosts dopamine levels. And when I say boost dopamine levels, not only can it directly increase the amount of dopamine that's present in the body, but it can also increase the number of receptors, the sensitivity of those receptors. So now you have increased levels plus an increased ability to utilize that dopamine that's in the system, okay? A big note to take here in regards to exercise and to physical activity is it doesn't need to be high intensity. You don't need to go to the gym for 6 days a week for 3 hours at a time, working as hard as you possibly can. Guys, simply going for a brisk walk for 10 minutes can increase your dopamine levels and your dopamine sensitivity. Some other things to think about are exposure to sunlight. So being exposed to sunlight helps the body produce vitamin D. Vitamin D plays a very important role in dopamine development within the body. Music, listening to music, guys. Creative hobbies of all kinds. These things give you that sense of working towards an end goal. Okay, and that's a big thing because like I mentioned before, that whole pleasure reward system is pretty much put in place to help us achieve things. And this is an important one, don't want to skip over it, but pleasurable touch, anything from petting your dog to hugging your children to spending time holding your loved one's hands, things like that, All of these things can make a huge difference, guys. So don't negate any of these. And again, there are others to add to the list, but just be sure that you're aware that these are things that you can do on a daily basis, and they don't take a whole lot of extra time or energy. These are simple changes, simple adjustments that you can make. With that being said, guys, remember, dopamine is that motivation molecule. This is something that all of us have a need for. It's programmed within us, but because of the way that many of us live our lives, the things that we are doing that we should not be doing, and the things that we should be doing that we are not doing, have started to create this negative trend in all sorts of manners of mental and physical wellness, guys. So if you found this information useful, if you feel like you learned something, if you feel like you want to continue to learn, please be sure to like the video, follow our channel, subscribe, and definitely be sure to leave any comments, any thoughts, any feedback, particularly in regards to any items or any topics that you might want us to produce videos for here in the future, guys. Any topics that you want us to cover, we'll be happy to do it, guys. Until then, see you next time.